one of the things that Richard Riakporhe has been saying in the run-up to this fight is that he thinks Chris Billam-Smith is actually a bit jaded now. And I concur with that. It was in a grueling fight against Okoli. His last fight against Masternak was very tough. And for my money, Masternak was winning that fight and he had it under control, really. And then inexplicably, he just quit. Very, very strange. Anyway, whatever you think of that, the point I'm making here is that Chris Billam-Smith has been getting hit too much for one, and he's been in some grueling fights. I didn't see massive improvement against Masternak. If anything, I saw a little bit of regression. I just think that Richard Riakporhe has been improving steadily. I really didn't think too much of him earlier on in his career. I know he beat Chris Billam-Smith, and that was a good fight, by the way, that they had. When I watched that fight, to me, it was very clear the Riakporhe was very, very raw and very, very green because he looked so tense. Every time he was throwing a right hand, he had this grimace on his face, like it took all of his effort and all of his strength just to throw one right hand. You know, and that's a sign of inexperience because he just couldn't relax in the fight at all. He felt very, very tense and uptight. And he was like that for a lot of his early career. But gradually, certainly over the past couple years, he's started to relax into his boxing and he's looked much better. So as long as he can bring that recent form into this fight here against Chris Billam-Smith, I expect him to win again. And I expect him actually to get the stoppage this time. Chris Billam-Smith, we know, is very, very tough. He's got a good chin. He's been hurt in fights, but he's always come back. Nobody's ever been able to stop him. But there's a first for everything. And I do think that Billam-Smith is a little jaded now. He will have traveling fans from Bournemouth, but it's not going to be the same feeling as when he's fighting at home. There's going to be plenty of Richard Riakporhe fans there as well. Chris Billam-Smith, I think, definitely draws off the crowd, the energy of the crowd in Bournemouth, and that gets him through tough patches in fights. Look, even in Bournemouth, I would be picking Richard Riakporhe to win. But in South London, I'm going to say Richard Riakporhe gets the stoppage. Let's say late. That's the way I see the fight. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section below. So on to the next. Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin. Two southpaws, both 29 years of age. Davis 29-0. Frank Martin 18-0. Gervonta Davis, very good puncher, as we are all well aware. He's scored 27 knockouts out of those 29 wins. Now, that's very, very, very unusual for fighters in the lower weight classes to have such a high knockout percentage. 27 knockouts out of 29 fights. That's crazy. Contrast that with Frank Martin, who's had 12 knockouts in 18 wins. And Frank Martin hasn't been fighting at the same level as Gervonta Davis. You see, if you're a prospect coming through and you're yet to fight anybody decent, then yeah, you might have that type of knockout ratio in the lower weight classes. But if you've been fighting the level of opponents that Gervonta Davis has been fighting, to keep up that kind of knockout ratio is crazy. Trust me, 93% knockout ratio. Now, I know a lot of people criticize Gervonta Davis, and for the most part, it's warranted because he has been maneuvered by Mayweather Promotions in accordance with, let's just call it the Mayweather method. That's what I've called it on my YouTube channel for many years. And it's a style of boxing management where you're very, very careful about who you fight and when you fight them. But at the same time, you spin a narrative in the public as if you're willing to fight anyone at any time. That formula has been used by many fighters over the years. I mean, it really predates Floyd Mayweather, but he was the guy that perfected it. Al Heyman was probably the mastermind of it, but yeah, Mayweather and Heyman, they perfected that method, and Mayweather's taken it forward, and now most of his fighters, at least the fighters he thinks he can make money out of, he tries to maneuver them in the same way, and it was certainly the case for Gervonta Davis most of his career. We all remember when he won his first world title back in 2017, and he immediately ducked Vasyl Lomachenko after winning that world title, like shamelessly. And since then, he has fought some good fighters. You know, he's fought the likes of Yuriorkis Gamboa, although he was way past his best. Leo Santa Cruz, he'd seen better days and he was a small guy. Mario Barrios, he stopped him in 11 rounds. Isaac Cruz, that's probably one of his better wins. He won a UD over 12. Rolly Romero, Hector Luis Garcia, Ryan Garcia last time out, although it was a weight drain, Ryan Garcia. So he doesn't have the greatest resume in the world, but he's definitely fought better opponents than Frank Martin. Okay, Frank Martin's a guy who kind of has come in under the radar and he's getting his first real opportunity now. You look at his record and You've got no idea who a lot of these people are. So his last fight was against the guy whose surname I will not try to pronounce, but he beat the guy over 12. Prior to that, Michelle Rivera, Jackson Martinez before that, Romero Duno. I mean, yeah, who are these people? I mean, I know Rivera, but most of the people on Frank Martin's record, no idea who they are. If you haven't watched Frank Martin, he's a southpaw. He's decent, but not spectacular. That's the impression you get from him when you watch him. He isn't weak in any one area in particular. I mean, if there's one area where he's least strong, you might say punching power, but it's not like he's feather-fisted. He's not Malignaggi in there. He does have some power. Yeah, he's just a good all-round fighter, but nothing exceptional. As Floyd Mayweather would say, no special effects. Whereas with Tank Davis, well, he does have tremendous punching power. I've already touched on that. He's also an underrated defensive fighter. He's got a good chin. He's smart in the ring. May not be smart outside the ring, still a hood rat outside the ring, but inside the ring, he's smart in there. We all remember the way he walked Ryan Garcia onto that big left hand. So he's sneaky with it. He had Ryan Garcia opening up on him, and Garcia is a formidable force when he's opening up on you. He's very fast. Tank Davis was very calm in the situation, tucked up, moved around, and waited for the opportunity to lower the boom and crack him with that big left. And one of the things that might be a little underrated about Gervonta Davis is how awkward he is because of his height. So he's a very short guy. On BoxRec, he's listed at 5'5". Now, there was a fighter back in the 1990s. He went on long past his sell-by date, but his best years were in the 1990s, called Montel Griffin. Now, Montel Griffin was a short guy for light heavyweight. He was only about 5'7". Normally with shorter fighters, they tend to be very front foot heavy. They tend to be pressure fighters. But Montel Griffin was a short fighter who liked to box at long distance. Like he'd be in there with a guy that was like 6'2", and Montel Griffin's there standing at long range, boxing with a guy who's 6'2" when he's only 5'7". And he was very successful doing that. Montel Griffin, I guess, is most famous for those two fights he had with Roy Jones. The first fight, he gave Roy Jones a lot of problems, but Roy Jones dropped him late in the fight and then followed up with a punch. He hit Montel Griffin when Griffin had one knee on the canvas, and he ended up being disqualified. So that's when Roy Jones lost his unbeaten record. It was by disqualification to Montel Griffin. In the rematch, Roy Jones had the bit between his teeth and he blasted Montel Griffin out in one round just to erase any doubts about who was the superior fighter. But yeah, in the first fight, Montel Griffin showed what he was all about. And he also fought James Toney and, various people in the light heavyweight division. And I'm going to say Gervonta Davis is a better fighter than Montel Griffin pound for pound, but he has that same kind of awkwardness about him where you're not used to a short guy like that being able to box you at long range. It's all to do with timing, foot speed, hand speed, reflexes, head movement, so on and so forth. But yeah, Gervonta Davis is able to do that with taller guys, the same way that Montel Griffin did back in the days. Tank Davis can come forward and apply pressure. We've seen him do it. But he also, in many other fights, likes to box at range against taller men. We saw that against Ryan Garcia. And that's just an unusual thing for taller fighters to have to contend with. It's a strange look for them. Yeah, they're used to short guys coming at them. They're not used to a short guy staying on the outside and actually being successful against them. Sorry to labor the point. In this fight, long story short, I'm expecting a Tank Davis win. I think that Tank Davis is going to be better in most departments. It's going to be interesting to see the strategy that Frank Martin chooses to adopt in this fight, whether he will try to pressure Gervonta Davis, whether he'll mix it up, whether he'll try and use his legs, maybe force Gervonta Davis to, come at him and then try and counter him. We shall see. Obviously, Frank Martin is managed, I think. I'm not sure if he's promoted, but managed by Errol Spence. Spence is the guy who quote unquote discovered him. But yeah, let's see what happens. I'm expecting Gervonta Davis to get the job done. I reckon he'll stop Frank Martin. Let's say 8-9 rounds. We'll get him out of there. That's what I'm expecting. We'll see what happens. On the same card, you've got David Benavidez taking on Alexander Gvozdyk. Now, apparently these two guys sparred back in the days. I think it was Jim Lampley. I saw an interview with him recently where he said that Benavidez admitted that he sparred Gvozdyk back in the days, and Gvozdyk was actually lighting him up in sparring. That's according to Jim Lampley. Obviously, sparring is sparring. It's a long time ago. Gvozdyk was a much younger man. He's now 37 years of age, 10 years older than David Benavidez. Benavidez has really come into his own over the past few years. At 168, yes, but he's now stepped up to 175. Now, Gvozdyk retired after losing to Artur Beterbiev, and I really wondered about that because he lost to Beterbiev. He was stopped by him in the amateurs as well, and the body language of Gvozdyk, that whole fight with Beterbiev, to me, he looked intimidated. He looked like a guy who hadn't gotten over the kind of psychological dynamic between himself and Beterbiev since they were amateurs. It's like Beterbiev had this hold over him, and you could see Gvozdyk trying to fight against it, but it was just too much for him. Beterbiev isn't just a technically good fighter, a big puncher, so on and so forth, but he has a very, very, very strong will. And it's palpable for the opponents when they're in the ring with him. They feel his will, they feel his intensity, the look in his eyes. He's just very, very sure of himself in the ring. And when he's got the skill and when he's got the punching power and the physical strength to go with that, it breaks people down psychologically. And that's what he did to Alexander Gvozdyk, so much so that Gvozdyk retired. It's as if he thought to himself, you know what? As long as this guy is champion, there's no point me boxing. That says something to me about Gvozdyk, and I don't mean that in a good way. No disrespect to the guy, but to be retiring off the back of that, maybe it's logical, but so many other fighters will be like, nah, I'll fight this guy 100 times until I beat him. Some people are picking Gvozdyk for the win here. It is, after all, the first time David Benavidez will have fought at 175 pounds, and, some people see him as a weight bully at 168. They're not sure his skill set and his ability will really transfer to light heavyweight. We shall find out. But personally, I'm going with Benavidez in the fight. I think Gvozdyk, the time he had out the ring was several years. And since coming back, he's had some, let's say, C-level opposition. He fought the likes of Ricard's Bolotniks. I think that fight was in Mexico, wasn't it? On an undercard, a Canelo undercard. Fought Bolotniks. His last fight was a KO win over Isaac Rodriguez. But I think he's lost a bit of a step, Alexander Gvozdyk. He's not the same guy who beat Adonis Stevenson back in the days. As you would expect at this age, time out the ring, so on and so forth. He is a good boxer. He can move well. He does have some decent punching power, always did. But you also have to factor in Benavidez is the guy for PBC right now. He's one of their main guys. So they're not bringing Gvozdyk in to win the fight. They're bringing him in to lose the fight. You see what I'm saying? So the boxing politics are going to be on Benavidez's side here. If it's a close fight, you'd imagine the judges are going to be going for him. And I think it will be relatively close. Let's say for the first 7 or 8 rounds, but I think in the back end of the fight, let's say the final 4 rounds, Benavidez is really going to start cranking up the pressure. And I'm not sure if he'll get Gvozdyk out of there. I'm not 100% sure because I don't think he's the puncher that Artur Beterbiev is, but he applies a lot of pressure. He's very consistent, gets hit plenty himself. In fact, I would say he's probably not defensively as sound as Artur Beterbiev, but I think he throws more punches and he's got more energy, and that will be enough to see him through to, I want to say, a points decision over 12 rounds against Gvozdyk. If not, possibly a late stoppage. That's how I see this fight going down. All right, moving on to the next item here. So Matias versus Billiam Paro. This fight is taking place in Puerto Rico. This is Matchroom's first show in that country. Billiam Paro has had some good wins over the past few years. He beat Montana Love, really exposed him, although Montana Love had a very, very difficult time with another Australian fighter whose name escapes me, Stevie Spark. He is Australian, isn't he? Not from New Zealand. Yeah, he had a very tough time with Stevie Spark, but Billiam Paro finished Montana Love. Prior to that, he fought his countryman Brock Jarvis. I think he knocked him out in 1 round. I remember that fight. Brutal knockout, actually. And yeah, Billiam Paro has been relatively impressive for a fighter who's come from obscurity. Normally you hear about guys quite far down the line, when they're 10-0, 11-0, 12-0. You start hearing about them if they've got real ability. But with Billiam Paro, he must have been 20-0 by the time I first heard about him. So, he's a guy that's come out of the shadows, come from obscurity, but he's been relatively impressive. He's 24-0, 28 years of age. Billiam Paro is a southpaw, going up against Subriel Matias, who is 32 years of age, 20-1. Subriel Matias is an orthodox fighter. And he's got this long streak where he's managed to make his opponents quit. Now, a lot of people are very high on Subriel Matias. Personally, I'm not one of them. I'm not saying Matias is rubbish. I'm not saying he's no good, but the cult following that he's garnered seem to think that he's like the best fighter in the division or something. And personally, I don't see it. He hasn't shown me anything to convince me as of yet that he's the best fighter at 140 pounds. I mean, I would pick Teofimo Lopez to beat him. Lopez, we've seen in the past, has trouble with guys who are slick and awkward, long-rangey southpaws, right? So Subriel Matias doesn't fit that description, okay? He's a come-forward pressure fighter. He's not particularly fast. Not the slowest guy in the world, but he's not particularly fast. He's right there in front of you. He throws lots of punches. He applies a lot of pressure. When it comes to his punching power, he's got a perfect knockout percentage, 100%. But again, you watch his fights. I don't think he's really such a crazy puncher. He's obviously doing something right, making all these guys quit, because he's had, 5 opponents retire on their stool in a row, which is pretty crazy. Is that a record in boxing? Maybe you'd have to go back to the very early days of Queensberry Rules to find something like that. You probably will find something like that. But in recent times, I've never heard of anything such as this, a guy making the last 5 opponents retire on their stool. But again, therein lies the rub. He's making them retire on their stool. He's not knocking them out. To be fair, the guys he's been making retire on their stool, several of them were unbeaten guys. You have to give him kudos. You have to give him credit. But this fight right here against Liam Paro, I think will tell us a little bit. It's not like Liam Paro is proven beyond the people that Subriel Matias has fought so far, because he probably isn't. But again, he's another fresh guy. He's an unbeaten guy. He's a southpaw. He's got some power himself. He's got some know-how. So I'm expecting an interesting fight, but Liam Paro is going to be under the cosh. The fight's in Puerto Rico. It's going to be an unusual environment. And I'm expecting Subriel Matias to get the win. How impressive he looks, I don't know. It will be bizarre if he makes Liam Paro quit on his stool. That's what I will say. Because how long can this making people quit on their stool streak go on for? Surely he won't be able to do it against Liam Paro. We shall see. But yeah, I'm expecting Matias to win this fight. Will he stop Liam Paro? I think there's a relatively good chance. Anyway, next one here. The Saudis have now, maybe they've put it out through the media, or I don't think there's been any kind of official announcement yet, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're apparently looking to create some type of boxing league, which will be something similar to the UFC. And there are several possibilities on the table in terms of how they want to do this. They could partner with a bunch of promoters, or they could buy the promoters out. Now, for many years, there have been boxing fans. I've not been one of them, but there have been many other boxing fans over the years who have wanted to see the UFC model implemented in boxing. And I've always thought that it would be impossible because boxing is just too big. Then again, UFC isn't the whole of MMA. There are lots of other MMA companies aside from UFC. It's just that UFC is seen as the cream of the crop. That's where the best fighters are. And so if you're UFC champion, it's taken as a given that you're the best in that weight class in the whole of MMA. That isn't actually true. Okay, you can't prove that definitively, which is one of the issues I have with the UFC model. And so if such a league could be implemented by the Saudis, and they've got the money to set something like this up, if they can sort out, the promoters and compensate them in a way that they're happy with, whether they buy their companies out or do contracts with their companies, so on and so forth. But you wouldn't want a situation where the same few top fighters are fighting each other over and over again, and unsung contenders don't get a look in because they're not part of the league. You see what I'm saying? Because that's literally what UFC is. It's a bit of an optical illusion. Now, in boxing, that type of scenario, some would argue, exists anyway in many divisions, where if you're not with certain promoters, you're not going to get a look in for a world title. But at least we still have the mandatory system. You see, the mandatory system can offer opportunities for sometimes very obscure fighters to get title shots. And when they get their title shots, sometimes they spring upsets. That's the beauty of the mandatory system. And so I would not want any kind of boxing league to be formed, UFC style model, where there isn't a mandatory system where people outside of the league can't get a shot. I think that's very, very important to keep it interesting. Because one of the reasons that boxing, particularly heavyweight boxing, for example, has been so compelling over the decades is because of these massive upsets. You know, you have people like Buster Douglas, obviously Leon Spinks when he beat Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay as he was then, beating Sonny Liston. You've had Oliver McCall knocking out Lennox Lewis. Michael Spinks against Larry Holmes. These upsets are what make heavyweight boxing so compelling, as well as the great fights and trilogies and rivalries and all the other stuff, the knockouts, the power. But it's the element of unexpected that really keeps you on your toes with heavyweight boxing, at least for me. And so if you've got, let's say, 10 fighters or even 20 fighters who are all signed up to this Saudi boxing league in one division, and they're all fighting each other over and over again, it gets incestuous and it removes that element of surprise of some obscure guy coming out of nowhere and chinning the champion. And it creates a false impression because styles make fights. You might be able to beat everybody within that pool of 20 fighters in your division who are signed up to this league, but there may be fighters who are very good that are not signed up to the league for whatever reason. They can't get a slot in the league, whatever the case may be. You see, so there are problems with the model from a fan perspective, at least from my perspective. Another concern, which Stephen Espinoza raised actually, and Stephen Espinoza, I'm no fan of him, but he did make a valid point, and that was regarding fighters' pay. Now, some people don't care about fighters' pay. They look at it purely from a fan perspective. They don't give a shit what fighters get paid. As far as they're concerned, a fighter could get paid nothing and be forced to fight and then still tune in and watch it, like the old days in the Roman Colosseum. But it probably is because I come from a boxing background myself. I boxed as an amateur. Growing up, boxing was my thing. So I do kind of sympathize with fighters. I want to see fighters get paid well. I want to see fighters get compensated. If a fighter manages to garner a following and he doesn't have a world title, but somehow, for whatever reason, he's able to draw a big crowd, fighting bums and make loads of money, I've got no problem with that. In fact, more power to him. The only issue I have is when a guy with a world title is doing that. That's when it's a problem. Because when you're a world champion, you are basically staking your claim as the best in the division. And if you're just cherry picking and fighting bums and, messing about, and your sanctioning body is facilitating it, you're basically conning the fans. And I don't want to be conned. So that's an issue. Okay. But aside from that scenario, I want fighters to make as much money as they can. So anyway, long story short, this Saudi league, it really depends on how they structure it for me. And another thing as well is that with this league, they're saying that at least at the start, it won't be all weight classes. It won't be all 17 divisions. And that's another thing that you have to bear in mind. In the UFC model, there's far fewer weight classes than there is in boxing. In boxing, there's 17, in fact, 18 weight classes, 17 and a half, because Bridgerweight has only got 2 of the major sanctioning bodies that recognize it. UFC has got, 5 or 6 divisions, 7 divisions maybe? It's got far fewer than boxing. And that works for the UFC because it keeps it uncomplicated for the fans, for the viewers. When you've got 17 weight classes to keep track of, it's very, very difficult. And this is one of the reasons why trying to put boxing under a UFC style model will be extremely difficult. I mean, it might be similar to UFC, but in terms of exactly like UFC, I think it's probably impossible because what are you going to do? Bring everybody into the league in the 17 weight classes? All those different promoters from all over the world, Japan, and I mean, maybe they can do it. Maybe I'm underestimating the depth of the Saudi pocket. I know they got very deep pockets, like crazy deep pockets, but I don't think they'll do more than they feel like they have to do in order to achieve their objectives. And I don't think they would necessarily have to incorporate 17 weight classes into the boxing league. What it says in this Boxing Scene article I'm looking at right now is they'll be looking to concentrate on the heavier weight classes, at least at first, and see how things go. So, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about it. Let me know how you feel about it in the comments section. All right. Jared Anderson is hooking up with Sugar Hill. He's going to be his trainer, it would seem, his lead trainer for his fight against Martin Bakole. And unfortunately, I don't think that fight is actually signed yet. It's listed on BoxRec. It's been reported by ESPN and various other boxing outlets. But I think they've still got some contractual things to iron out. I hope it gets ironed out because that's a fight I really want to see. And as I say, Jared Anderson hooking up with Sugar Hill Steward. I don't know. I think it's probably a good move. I say I don't know because Jared Anderson isn't the kind of fighter you would normally associate with the Kronk style and the Kronk methods But then again, neither was Tyson Fury prior to hooking up with Sugar Hill Steward. And that's been a relatively good fit, I would say, for Tyson Fury. You've got Jared Anderson, who's very gung-ho. He likes to go in there looking for the knockout. And he's unconventional, Jared Anderson, but sometimes that is to his detriment. Certainly the way he leans back from punches without moving his feet as well. He's been caught several times doing that, particularly in the Charles Martin fight. It's a bad habit he needs to get out of. There may be certain situations where that can work for him, but at least against taller fighters with fast hands, that's not going to work for him. He's going to be getting caught over and over again. And he seems like a stubborn kid that doesn't want to listen when people are giving him advice. Even people who have been there, seen it and done it, like Tim Bradley. He got upset with Tim Bradley for saying that he shouldn't be doing that lean back and all that kind of thing. So he's a stubborn kid. Did the Charles Martin fight teach him a lesson at all? I don't know. Sugar Hill Steward, I know, has got knowledge which can help Jared Anderson become a better fighter. I think it wouldn't hurt to actually teach him a few things, some boxing fundamentals that are a bit more conventional. I think it wouldn't hurt for him to have that in his locker, to have that skill set to know how to use his attributes in a more conventional way that is effective. So I think that's a good thing. I'm just not sure if Sugar Hill Steward has got the will, if he's the type of personality who can really, influence and command a fighter like Jared Anderson, who can direct him. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. Who can direct him. I'm not sure if Sugar Hill's that guy because he hasn't been able to keep control of his corner with Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's dad's come in, barged his way into the situation. A strong trainer should never allow that. You need to put your foot down and say, look, if the fighter's going to allow this, if the fighter's going to have me battling with people in the gym, having people talk to me a certain way, I don't care who it is, if he's your dad or whoever, if the fighter's going to allow this stuff, multiple voices talking in the corner, then I'm walking. I'm gone. But with Sugar Hill, he doesn't seem to be that guy. Maybe it's because the money he's getting with Tyson Fury is so good. Perhaps with a fighter who he's making a lot less money from, he would walk in that situation. Who knows? But that's probably my only concern with Jared Anderson is whether Sugar Hill is strong enough to deal with a stubborn young fighter like that. Yeah, because Jared Anderson is very, very stubborn. We shall see. But as far as the Bakole fight, I can definitely understand why a lot of people are picking Bakole because Jared Anderson in the Charles Martin fight showed vulnerability. He got hurt in that fight. He was taken the distance and wobbled on multiple occasions by a guy who Anthony Joshua wiped out with ease years ago. Okay, and he was also stopped by an ancient Luis Ortiz in 7 rounds. He did drop Ortiz a couple times, to be fair. I think it was 7 rounds, right? Somewhere around the midway stage, Ortiz managed to stop Charles Martin. But Jared Anderson never came close to stopping him. He hurt him. In fact, did he drop him in the fight? He might have dropped him. But he never came close to having him out and finishing him. So people are still thinking about that in their mind, and they're then looking at Martin Bakole, who's a very strong fighter, big guy, close to 300 pounds, walks forward, relentless, very good fitness. So I get it. But Jared Anderson's fitness, I think, is on another level to Martin Bakole. Bakole's got great fitness, but I think Anderson's fitness is on another level. I think he's faster, quicker hands, quicker feet, and he's able to throw punches just non-stop. I think it will be an attritional fight. I think it will be Anderson's gas tank against Bakole's gas tank. But Anderson being the faster guy, I think he'll have an advantage there in terms of maneuverability, being able to land more than Martin Bakole's landing, having more options. Bakole's not going to get on the back foot if he's getting outworked up close, is he? I mean, he can go on the back foot. I've seen him briefly box off the back foot in a couple fights, but it's not very pretty and it's not that effective. So I'm saying Jared Anderson's the guy with options in terms of tactics, switching things up on the fly. Maybe Bakole's tougher. Maybe Bakole's got a better chin. Maybe Bakole with the extra weight is physically stronger. But I'm going to go with the younger guy in that fight, in Jared Anderson. I think the power of youth, and I think their skill sets are actually comparable. Martin Bakole certainly doesn't do that lean back. He doesn't make as many silly mistakes, but he does get caught. It's not like Martin Bakole can't be caught. He can be caught. And of course, we all remember the Michael Hunter fight back in the days where he was getting caught a lot and he was eventually stopped. So yeah, I see Jared Anderson beating Martin Bakole. And then poor Billy Nelson will be crying into his porridge probably for the rest of eternity over that, because he's still trying to sell us on this idea that it wasn't the real quote-unquote Martin Bakole that night against Michael Hunter. Well, who was it then? His twin brother? No, it was the real Martin Bakole. He weighed the same as he normally weighs. He fought the same way he normally fights. He was just up against the guy who, at least for that night, had his number. That's all. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. I'll leave it there.